In the first century, the word Sabbath could mean week. Leviticus 23:15 speaks of 7 complete Sabbaths. You shall count, Deuteronomy 16:9, you shall count 7 weeks for yourself. You shall begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put out the sickle to the standing grain. Then you shall celebrate the Feast of Weeks to the Lord your God with a voluntary offering of your hand in a proportional amount, which you shall just give as the Lord your God blesses you. Now, let me go over the calendar for this year, because it's a unique calendar, because Shabbat falls on, when is the 14th? Saturday evening. So we will be celebrating Passover on Shabbat evening, the evening of Shabbat. And so if we count from the festival, yeah, no 12th, but the 14th of Aviv is Sunday night. Saturday night.
Well, that's the 15th, the 14th, which goes into the 15th. Between the evenings.
Am I not saying the same thing? Evenings
is Saturday night.
with Saturday night. Yeah, the 14th. That moves into the 15th. Yeah.
Saturday day.
But then
It starts on
Sunday.
Friday. Yeah.
I'm getting confused. So this year is unique in that, and we switched last year to starting the counting of the Omer from the festival Sabbath instead of the weekly Sabbath as we've done previously. So that would be starting counting when? When will you do? What day would you start counting? If it's the day after be Sunday. Be Sunday. If you count the festival Sabbath, it'll be Sunday. When will it be if you count from the weekly Sabbath? How come Easter is a week later? I can't hear you.
They changed it at the council, is it Nicaea, to be after the Sunday after the spring equinox. To the that's when they started celebrating
So
resurrection.
if we celebrate the counting of the Omer from the festival Sabbath, when do we start counting the Omer?
Sunday.
Sunday. Now, if we count the Omer from the weekly Sabbath, when will you count the Omer? The next week? On Sunday?
So, I'm understanding your question, the weekly one, so the one based off of 7 days of the week. This year, that would be the Sunday right after, because Passover is Friday going to Saturday, so the next one after. It'd be easier if I had a calendar I was looking at. As it involves the weekly one, on the way the calendar is, it works out this year based off where Passover lines up. If it's the first Sunday or the first day after the weekly Shabbat within Passover, thank you, then that would be the, 16th? Am I looking at the right day here, or which one's this? This calendar. Give me 1 second.
16th or 15th?
Yeah, so if April 12th this year, the day portion of it is Passover, and the first day of unleavened would be that Saturday night going into Sunday. I guess technically, depending on when looked at that, they would either count it that Sunday, the 13th, or they'd be starting the next 20th. That would be a good question. I'm looking at that. Now that I'm looking at a visual, now I'm like, what would that fall in on?
It would have to be the next week if it's after
If it's
The
after the
sh-
full
the
week
Sabbath.
of unleavened, yeah.
the
That would be-
weekly Sabbath.
Yeah.
It would have to be the following week.
Although the offering would have been in the afternoon, they didn't do the Passover meal until between the evenings.
Right.
So that would be Saturday evening. Sorry.
Start over again.
I said that although on Saturday the Passover lamb would be sacrificed, they didn't eat the Passover until between the evenings of the 14th and the 15th, which would be Saturday evening, which is why we're celebrating it Saturday evening.
Correct.
So after the Passover, then I would think then they would start counting the following Sunday, not that Sunday, but the next Sunday.
Correct.
Because traditionally, the Passover and unleavened bread were kind of considered together. Passover was sometimes used the same as unleavened bread.
So you're saying they're interchangeable, the sort of terms are interchangeable. Okay. Remembering that the early community, the majority opinion would have been to celebrate after the, the festival Sabbath. So the day after the festival Sabbath would be Monday, actually. It would be Sunday. You start counting on Sunday, okay. Now, any other comments you'd like to make or questions you'd like to ask? I'm not sure we're clear on things, but
Following Sabbath is in a different week. I don't know if that makes any difference or not, because you have Passover and then you enter a different week. Normally, it's the Sabbath in that same week. So I don't know how the rules go on that.
I think it would be the following,
For the weekly.
yeah, for the weekly Sabbath, it would have to be the following week. We count,
It has to roll to
The Omer.
to a separate week rather than within that same week.
okay. Yes,
Yeah, my understanding as it involves the weekly one, and I know there's like 3 different versions. There's the one that comes in after the yearly Sabbath, being the first day of unleavened. So the 16th, that's how someone look at that. That the 16th is always where you start the count from. Then there's the weekly Sabbath. So let's say Passover is on Wednesday. That weekly Sabbath, that Saturday, then you start after that. So the Sunday right after, the first day of the week. And then you have, am I understanding you correctly, the third version, which is the weekly, yearly Shabbat of the Festival of Unleavened, because the last day of Unleavened is a yearly Shabbat. That some started the count from there. Are those the 3 different versions? Just to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay.
Yeah, one problem with the weekly is that Leviticus 23 says complete Sabbath. And if you look at when it counts the Sabbaths in Leviticus and you compare that with Deuteronomy 16:9, in Leviticus it uses the word for Sabbath as Sabbaton. But in Deuteronomy, it does not. It uses the word week, Shavua, Shavuot. So in Scripture, oftentimes Sabbath was used for the word week. And there is a plain indication in Deuteronomy 16:9, where in counting the Omer, it says Shavua or Shavuot, not Sabbatot. 7 weeks. It doesn't say 7 Sabbaths. Now in Leviticus 23, it says complete Sabbaths, which if it were just the Sabbath, complete would not make sense, because a Sabbath is always every 7th day, on a Saturday. And so the word complete shows you too that it's talking about weeks and not just Sabbaths.
so it's the counting of the Omer would be 7 weeks. Whether it's on you start counting on a Wednesday or start counting on today. At this time, we're starting to count on Sunday. Okay. So any other comments? Because this has been going on for how long? A couple of thousand years? Okay, so, because in the first century, they definitely had 3 different views. They would start counting after the Sabbath of the week. Second view, the Sabbath of the festival. And then the Sabbath of the second Sabbath of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a week later. So at this one, coming up this week, this Passover is complicated because we're meeting together on Shabbat evening. On Shabbat evening. So how do we count? Give me some more questions or comments. Because, yes,
Well, we could always count backwards from the projected date of Shavuot and see what works.
can't do that. That'd
Why
be,
not?
because we're starting at two different dates.
Right, I understand that, but with the parameters that you've talked about, we can actually count backwards from each date and see which one fits best.
Only if you knew first century where it fell.
So why
so-
would it be different to count today backwards?
Today it would be May 19th. If you counted just the way we count,
Mm-hmm.
it would be April 19th.
That's what I was looking at.
50 days.
See, also we have the Jewish calendar, and of course, in the Jewish calendar, they would count from the, what? The feast of the festival. Yeah, the festival. Yes. That was nice.
Instant service here. No, what I was thinking is the count defines Shavuot. So you can't assume Shavuot and count backwards because the count is what defines the Shavuot. So you have to begin with this discussion about the Sabbaths and so forth.
Yes. So, any other input? Yes.
We have a chart that we can see. I'm very visual.
Oh, yeah. No. We're trying to get the chart up on the TVs. Yeah.
I'm not like overly dogmatic on it because in my own research, it's something I've looked at before. It does seem that there was a good, healthy debate, as you said, even in the first century.
Yes.
But that said, there is a certain way I tend to look at it, and it's based off the understanding I get. And again, there's still some debate here of when Yeshua was crucified, when he did rise, and when he would have revealed himself. I tend to believe that he revealed himself on the first day of fruits, first fruits, which I have understood in my own biblical understanding is that it tends to be the day after the weekly Shabbat. So regardless of what day Passover is, the Shabbat that comes after, Saturday, that day right after, is the day of first fruits. I know, again, there's some debate there, but part of my reasoning for looking at it that way too is it would seem to me that that's exactly what Yeshua did do. When he did reveal himself, it was on Sunday. Just like the revealing of the waving of the offering of the first fruit, the same thing, it coincides. That said, and I know within parts of church history, a lot of times they teach that Friday was the day of crucifixion. With the Protestant movement in some other areas, they said, no, it's Thursday. And the reasoning was because 3 days, you don't really get that from Friday. If you have crucifixion on Friday, you don't get a full 3 days. So they said Thursday. This is me, believe it actually falls on Wednesday, and the reason for that, his crucifixion, that is. So he would have been buried Wednesday night going into Thursday. The reason I believe that is because when we look at, I think it's in Luke and Matthew, or maybe it's in Luke and Mark, Yeah, there's the 3 days, 3 nights aspect. But when you look at Luke, and I think, again, I forget what the other one is in the Gospels, one of them says that the ladies bought the spices after the Shabbat. Another one says that they bought the spices and then rested on Shabbat. So either this is a contradiction or it's telling us something here. The average Christian, I've noticed when I've talked to them about it, tends to get a little confused there, but we know that there's the yearly Shabbats and also the weekly Shabbats, right? So the 15th of Nisan is a yearly Shabbat. You would have rested on that. If, and again, this is up for debate, I'm not overly dogmatic on this. If indeed Yeshua was crucified Wednesday, buried going into Thursday, Thursday would have been the 15th. It would have been the yearly Shabbat, a day of rest. You would have Friday, a day in between 2 Shabbats, a yearly Shabbat and a weekly Shabbat. The way I look at it, when I read, again, it's Luke, and I can't remember if it's John or Mark, the other one, these 2 areas where one says they bought the spices after Shabbat, and the other one says they bought it before Shabbat and rested. Well, if you got a day in between 2 Shabbats, there's no contradiction. But if that's the case, again, that would actually mean he probably was resurrected sometime Saturday afternoon going into the evening. In any case, he didn't reveal himself. It doesn't tell us the day he resurrected. We just know the day he revealed himself. He didn't reveal himself until the first day of the week. That's why this is up for debate, and I'm not dogmatic on it. That is why I think that Sunday actually is the day of first fruits, and that is the day where the count begins. But
Okay.
there's
Thank you for presenting that view. It's a view that I held for like 20 years. Thank you for presenting that view. I wasn't planning on getting into this discussion, but if we look, so Passover would be on what day of the week?
Wednesday evening.
Wednesday evening. I want you to do research. I want you to find out when, in the first century, Passover was on a Wednesday. And why does the typical church celebrate his death on a Friday? Oh, what year would that have occurred with a Passover on Friday? What year? You see, I'm working back through history a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, when we were doing this last year, we researched, of course, for years we thought that he died on Thursday. But we researched what day or what year did Passover, if did it fall on Thursday or Friday? And none of them around where he should have died. I mean, if he was 30 years old and born, say, 4 BC, the only year that it could have been was 30 AD. Passover was on a Friday.
But how do you reconcile the 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish?
Okay, we were over at our daughter's, what was it, Thursday night, and our son-in-law looked up on this chat something or other, and it says, yeah, that's what it was.
That's a new AI.
In first century in Judaism, a day was considered, it's made up of a day and the night. And it's been a while since I read Tim Haig's, but he goes into this on
partial
the
day.
passion, that a day is a partial day. It's considered, any
partial day.
part of a day is considered a day. And so he goes into this, and also, like the Lord, it says he would raise the third day. It didn't say after the third day. It said the third day. So, I'd have to go back and research that again, but that's how you can come up with him dying on a Friday afternoon and rising before sunrise on Sunday. You still have, technically in Judaism, 3 days, 3 nights.
Question?
Yeah, on that, this is something IHCS classes we did every year when we come around to it, So we debate the two every year. And first of all, I think it's difficult on the looking back to find which day is which, because there are multiple versions of that. So I'm not sure what data you're using and how reliable it is. I've heard things like you can't really determine because of certain things that happen in history that causes it to skew it. Okay, so when you look up the Sabbath or whatever Sabbath on a particular day, you may have problems because of the dates there. Also, when he says 3 days and 3 nights, I believe he means what he says. Why did he say 3 days and 3 nights? Why didn't he just say 3 days? He says 3 days and 3 nights. So 3 days, so I'm believing what Yeshua said, 3 days and 3 nights. The other thing is the controversy is between John and the Gospels, and it may be that they are using a different time frame. They're talking about the same thing, but they're using a different time frame. So one thing I know is that when Yeshua says, "I'll be in the belly of the earth 3 days and 3 nights," he means business, and that's the reason for the day and night, 24 hours, 3 24-hour periods. That's the way I interpret it. I think that's.
John, do you think that I have to? That's why you're running. Do you think it has to be the same 3 days and 3 nights? Like it could start at. No, not off and on. Not. My question isn't off and on. So biblically, you have, and the sundown is the beginning of the day, and sun up is the end of the day. So I'm saying, could one of those days be the starting of that timeline would be the last half of the day, and then you have 24 hours, and then you have the beginning of a day. So you have two whole.
One evening.
One morning. If we're evening and morning, you have a morning, 2 full days, and then evening. I'm not even looking at a calendar right now, so I don't even know if what I'm saying makes sense with the timeline. I'm just asking you if in your context, do you think there's a possibility? It does add up to 3 days and 3 nights. It's just the half, 2 wholes, and a half. Yeah.
According to the story, you have to be in the grave prior to sundown on the first day.
Okay, but he says he raised the third day. It doesn't say after the third day. The same thing with Esther.
When he raised the grave before the first day, he may come out before that day. Not after the day, but on the third day. That day's 72 hours. That's 72 hours. Yes.
I'm not big on the whole it had to be exactly 72 hours on the dot. However, you can still get, again, using the Wednesday one, you can get 3 nights, 3 days, with the third day sometime on that time. In other words, sometime after that 48-hour being that time, whether it's 72 hours exactly or not, but you can get 3 nights starting from essentially Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night. And then when you count the days, Thursday the day, Friday the day, Saturday the day. And then on sometime on that time being when he resurrected again. Not when he showed himself, but when he resurrected. That's how I look at it. And again, I'm not dogmatic because, as you said, 3 different versions. They've been arguing about this since that time and before it. I do think it fits what we have there with the events, specifically that one spot where why does one say before Shabbat, the other one says after. I don't think that's a coinkydink. I think that's a big clue. I could be wrong, but yeah.
I like the clue. It may provide the clue, but to reconcile John's gospel with the 3 previous other gospels is a grand challenge.
Something a while back, and I don't remember the details because I kind of put it on the back burner. I had bigger theological fish to fry, but you know what I mean? Because sometimes we have different things. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna come back to that.
Gotcha.
And it is something I plan on returning to. But yeah, I remember reading up and doing some studying on the idea that, again, just like we were saying, different traditions. How the Galilean tradition in particular had a particular view on this, and I right now off the top of my head I don't remember what it was. But one of their things was that they also did a Passover Seder like that supper before, which is exactly what Yeshua and the disciples did, being from the Galilee, right? So, and it was a Seder like because they still did a lot of the same stuff. I've read about that. Again, I put that in the back burner so I couldn't tell you a lot of details about it. But
Well, it
I just
would
find that
be-
interesting because, again, we see
Yeah.
this even within the, again, people forget it's Judaisms, right? But we've talked about that before.
That's right.
Not Judaisms of the time. But even then, amongst them, there was debate on some issues. Not everything, but on some issues, there was room for error that they allowed one another as well, which I think that's a big takeaway that we should also take in this particular area. But yeah.
The disciples would celebrate a Passover, and on Passover, one of the disciples would take over. And there would be a way of discipling future generations who would carry the traditions through. And so he would have celebrated the previous night, and he would have offered up himself the lamb on 3 o'clock. Yeah, at 3 o'clock the next day, he would offer up himself a sacrifice. So we see this principle of having and then in the evening, the disciples would meet together for the Passover. So, and celebrate on the 14th day. So,
There's controversy even with that, with the 3 o'clock, because there's logistics involved. How can you kill all these lambs and everything, get them all roasted and everything?
Gotta turn it on so we can all hear you.
Oh, my bad. I didn't turn it on.
It wasn't my fault.
Discussing folk, I wanna hear what you have to say.
Oh, good for you. There's a controversy there about the 3 o'clock because logistically, how can you kill all those lambs in that time? Now, what they did was they had a row of Levites there, I think 2 rows of them, and they'd kill the lamb, then they'd pass it back there, and then they do kind of like a conveyor belt thing. But even then, the discussion was, how in the world can they do that? So there was some thought and discussion about, well, maybe it started earlier than that so that they could meet the deadline for the Passover Seder, or the roasting of the lambs and so forth. So that's another consideration there.
yeah, in that regard, I would be looking for the official lamb that would close out all of the sacrifices for that day, which would be at 3 o'clock. That's how I would see that. So they would have had to start quite early. Okay. Well, it means a big deal this season because the two ways of counting the Omer are a week apart. So we will, again, this year, the debate remains open. It's been open for years. And so the debate remains open. This year we'll be celebrating the counting of the Omer from the festival Sabbath, which, by the way, changes every week. The other way, as Nate has said, it doesn't change. It's always the way the church celebrates it, as being a resurrection on the Sunday, always on the Sunday. And the sheaf first fruits, he was a sheaf of first fruits, and part of the festival celebrations tied directly into the days of counting. Okay, what's this? Whisper into the mic. Yeah.
Control plus.
It says Microsoft Edge hit not now.
Oh,
He was trying to.
This is a visual of the Wednesday night. Was it Passover Wednesday night?
Yeah.
Or the celebration of the Passover?
So essentially you would have Passover starting Tuesday night going into Wednesday, Wednesday being the day of crucifixion. Wednesday by the evening, as it says, they put the body in, so that goes into Thursday, right? So that first night of him actually being in the tomb would have been Thursday night, which on the Jewish reckoning starts Wednesday night, right? So that's that first night. First day being Thursday day. Second night is going into Friday. Second day being that Friday. And again, the way I look at it, my understanding is that's the day between the two Shabbats that allows for Luke to not be in contradiction with the other Gospels. That day in between two Shabbats. Going into Saturday being that final day. Now, when on Saturday that he resurrect, we don't know. Again, it doesn't tell us specifically that. That's one of the areas where it's silent on. It doesn't actually say the day he resurrected. It just tells us the day that he presented himself, the day that the rock was rolled away and all that, but it doesn't actually specify the day that his body resurrected.
Whether that evening or that morning?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I mean,
Twilight. That would make it right between Saturday and Sunday.
Not in the Hebrew reckoning because twilight is midnight, right? But in the Hebrew reckoning, the day, is that what you mean?
No.
Am I thinking the wrong thing when I think twilight? Oh, I'm sorry. I think twilight. I'm thinking midnight. I apologize. Listen, I'm on a few hours of sleep. Forgive me. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
You're doing well, Nate. You're doing well.
When you go, oh, look at that beautiful sunset. That's twilight.
Heard. But that's a visual of that. But if it helps, like, so with what you were saying on for the people that say it's Thursday, just take all this and shift it, right? Take the whole thing and shift it if it's Thursday, or for the ones that say it's Friday, take the whole thing and shift it 2 more days, and that's gives you a visual, regardless.
So essentially, this whole chart is correct in the time of day, like whether it be sunup or sundown, but it's people debate on which one is which day.
Yeah. So for this chart, insofar as regardless of what day it was, the order and everything here is correct. The question is does this move to Thursday or does it move to Friday? That's the visual that you have. So you can shift it one way or the other and then see what that looks like. But yeah, that was Matthew that put that up there. So my understanding again with that is that first fruits is always the day after the weekly Shabbat, after Passover. So let's say Passover was Wednesday or Passover was Thursday. The weekly Shabbat being Saturday, that feast of first fruit is always that Sunday. It will always be a Sunday. That's when he presented himself, yeah, at a minimum, yeah. Rose or presented himself. What was it? You were in reference to what you were saying since we have the visual here, for the Jews who said that they did it after the first of the unleavened, the first of the yearly Shabbat. For them, let's again just using this. Let's say don't even worry about Wednesday. 14th of Nisan, 15th of Nisan, 16th of Nisan. For them, this would have been for some of them when the Feast of First Fruits is, and they would start the Omer from there. Is what he was saying with the three different versions. They would start from here regardless of what day it is, right? So that's what that would look like. Because they do it after their high Sabbath. Yeah, some of them would count it from that. That's one of the versions he was talking about, one of the three versions. Was on, or is that debatable? Say it again, is that what? Is that high Sabbath debatable too of when that happened? On what day it fell on? Yeah, because that's the question. Which day of the week was when these things happened? And so this image here uses Wednesday as being when it starts. Again, shift it if you want. If you want to use Thursday, shift it if you want to use Friday. I agree with you on that one. Yeah, I agree. I got you.
That's what the Sunday church teaches. Good Friday, and then Sunday, right? And it's not 3 days.
Do I understand you?
Yes.
Friday is crucifixion, and Sunday is the day he rose, and they're counting all 3 days right there together, rather than 3 days. They're not honoring what the Jews did. Right.
Commotion
And that's
instead
the
of.
confusion on Friday, Sunday.
It comes out the same as the church, but the way how you get there is different.
But John, does that also?
Real quick, Joanne has your hand up. I want to give the mic and then I can pass it on to you guys.
So do I understand that you're setting the precedent this year that we start on Wednesday?
No.
I'm trying to figure it out. What are we doing as a
We started
congregation?
last year.
Uh-huh.
We're just having the discussion this year.
But I thought I heard you say that we're gonna. I thought I heard you say that we're gonna start on Wednesday and start counting the Omer or something like that.
No, counting the Omer after the festival Sabbath, compared with the weekly Sabbath.
This year it well, the end of Hagamatzah falls on a Sabbath.
Okay, so I appreciate the discussion. You got 2 minutes.
All right, I had a notification from another ministry that I follow, and they said the new moon was spotted in Israel, and they go with the 14th of Abib on the new moon as far as setting the time. What do you think about that?
I think that it's like going by the sighting of the new moon, because the astronomical, mathematical new moon is when? Donna? I think our minds are a little going to sleep. Yeah, the Jewish calendar, which is the astronomical, the mathematical not by the viewing of the Sabbath on.
Well, and then going into Saturday would be
Right.
Friday, Monday, Saturday night, and then Sunday would be the first Shabbat.
The first Shabbat. As far as the new moon, there's so many minor views. The major view is, when do they cite it in Israel? Right. When do they cite it in Israel? What if it's cloudy? Yeah, well, that's
When Jonathan told David, he said, "You stay here, and tomorrow you should be at meal with us because it's the new moon." Now, how would he have known that ahead of time?
Because they were raised observing the heavens, because the instruction in the scriptures is not to see the moon, it's to observe the heavens. So when the dark of the moon appears, everybody already knew that's what was going to happen.
Right, but I mean, you couldn't always see it. So,
Because it's the dark.
right.
you couldn't always see it
You don't see it.
because we
Saying
follow the Jewish calendar,
anticipated.
which is astronomical.
So can you explain the difference between astronomical and sighting?
Because sometimes you can't cite it, sometimes it's blank
So when you say astronomical, how do they determine the astronomical way?
mathematically.
Yeah.
Because
The
after
heavens.
months and months and even into years of observing the heavens, there is a pattern to what goes on seasonally and all the way around the year.
Okay. Okay.
Is your credit card in here? Come on.
Well, let me ask you a question. What happens when the sliver occurs? And it's, wait a minute, what happens when the sliver occurs during the day? So we follow the calendar that astronomically calculates it all for us.
It seems like it should all just like click and make sense. Like, right, like sighting is you're physically seeing. Astronomically, it's mathematic, NASA, they have their computations and all that. And then in my head, I'm like, does the moon ever stop doing what it's supposed to be doing? So why would it ever be different? Like, can we just count days and then we know that it's going to happen? Like, is there do the times change, days change between the waxing and the waning and the, I don't even know what these terms mean. I'm just throwing them out there. Like, is there a specific time between each of those movements of the moon, and we can all do our own calculations? Does NASA, like, does there have to be? I see your hand. So it's perfect. So like we can do not perfect. Like it. That's why I'm saying, why are you seeing it during the daytime? Why is the moon's not like doing its same thing over and over every single time? So there's like minutes are different between the different waxing and waning and all that.
We don't live in a perfect world.
So then that brings me to this question. So then that's kind of where I was going, is the sighting is, I understand the relying upon convenience because we live in that world in this time period, but the sighting of the moon and the sun and the stars and the heavens and all that go all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, where God says, I've given you the greater light and the lesser light, rule over the day, rule over the night, to set the times, the seasons, the holy days, all the things. And so where do we in our halakha and our observing and in our debating and all of that, where do we bring that up to where we're leaning into how God wants us to be connected to his world and talking about our devotion and our hearts of like seeing something is different than just NASA delivering us a time or a date.
Oh, I'm not answering that. My question was, so doing it every year is not cloudy. So when the new moon comes, so does the NASA calculations always sync with the first sighting when you can have the first sighting? Does that make sense?
When NASA says it's the new moon, it's the dark of the moon. There's one day where it's dark every month, and we're talking now about lunar months, not necessarily. I didn't turn it on. Well, maybe you did,
We
but
heard
not all
you.
the way. Okay. Yeah, I really don't need a mic, but they keep on giving it to my hand. So, and waxing is when the moon is getting bigger, and waning is when it's getting smaller visually in the sky. And if you haven't noticed, it always goes right to left, the opposite of the way we read. And that's because I think it syncs with the way Hebrews read their alphabet. So, as far as like NASA and all that, God made it simple enough that we can do it for ourselves just by acquainting ourselves with the cycles of the moon. And that's done easily just by going out and looking up every evening.
Yeah, again,
So if NASA's calculating the dark day, is it always calculating the dark day every year? So when the dark day comes, I know that the next night I'm going to see the moon. So that's what I'm saying, though. So you can bank your money on when NASA says that dark day is going to happen, it's going to happen. So that just means the next day it's always going to be a visual sighting.
Yeah, you're going to see the very first sliver.
okay. Also on the Jewish calendar, I wish I could grab mine real quickly. The first will occur this time or this time, or this day or this day. And I always look on the day before the first is calculated. So I go the evening before the first is calculated. So that's how we do it. That's how Jewish people do it in the diaspora. When we do not have the visual contact.
And like there would be no debate. Like we would be like,
you would think with satellites and everything.
someone around the world could just be paid to
So-
go up every day. Hey, I saw this. Take a picture, go down. Like,
So I'm not sure if that's what you meant when you said it's not precise, but like, besides the point of NASA, ever since the Enlightenment period, we in Western culture we have a way of looking down on a lot of the ancient world, as it involves math and stuff. The buildings and stuff they built are so precise mathematically with the signs and the times of the stuff and the stars. It's without power tools, without calculators. The reality is they knew this stuff. They were doing NASA before NASA was doing NASA, if you understand what I'm trying to say. Is it precise in that, is it like, for example, a day is not actually 24 hours? It's a little bit, I forget if it's more or less than that, but the point being is it's not precise in that sense. There's decimals, there's fractions there. They knew this from back in the day. They were able to figure this stuff out. What am I getting at? Why do we have a leap year? It's to help make up for the fact that that's not precise. So it's not precise in that sense, but in the fact that there's actual math that the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Celtics, the Babylonians, so on and so forth, had these things down to a T. Something that, frankly, gets some of these modern day people upset because it's like, well, those were the brown people. You know, that's how some of I'm not even trying to make it a racial thing, but that was a thing in the Enlightenment period. It's how did they figure this out? We have all these other no, they were able to do that. That being said, as it involves a lunar calendar, they were able to project. They in some cases had a 2-day feast for every new month as a just in case, but they were able to project. So if and when there were storms, or if and when there was et cetera, they knew, okay, we might not be able to see it, but based off everything we've already calculated, because we've been looking at this yearly for 1,000+ years, they were able to figure it out because there is a precise motion to it. Again, is it precise in like it's got whatever number .000? No, it's fractional, which to me is just amazing that they were able to do that, because you throw a fraction at me, I'm already messing up, and I'm a 21st century Westerner, right? So
Okay, so
I don't know.
there's all sorts of stuff out there. I'm going to close out now. We're going to close out, and there's some out there saying that we don't know when the Sabbath is. The only one that knows where the Sabbath is them. They know when the Sabbath arises. Now, the Sabbath may be on Wednesday, but they observe the Sabbath on Wednesday.
But not every 7 days.
But, right, so when do they start? Do they start with a new moon? Do they start over again? I don't know. I don't care. I think it's a lot of goofy stuff out there. So we just, I like simple. I pick up my calendar and I look. Okay? So that's how simple it is for me. So let's bow our heads in prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you because you are so loving and caring. And Lord, it's good to share. It's good to see other points of view. And we want to, Lord, seek you in all of this. And we realize, Lord, that we straddle two calendars. We straddle the lunar calendar and we straddle the solar calendar. And Father, there are some answers we just don't have. So, Lord, we just are looking to you. Thank you for this discussion today. And perhaps we can continue it. Give us wisdom in our day. And bless the coming week, Lord. It's starting tonight. In Yeshua's name, amen. So I